Okay, so last but not least, the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's development model is that it thinks it didn't have a model. It industrialised under free market, 17th and 18th centuries. Its industrialisation was kind of accidental. When you probe it further, it's really important that when Britain industrialised, no one else was industrialised. So it wasn't competing with anyone. So the British model has always struggled when there's been anyone to compete with. And, wonderful, wonderful metaphor for this is British sport. I mean, we've got good recently, I agree. But historically, we invented all the sports. And as soon as we taught anybody else to play them, they started to beat us. And that is really the case with industry. We got there first, we don't know how, it was kind of an accident, nobody planned it. And because nobody planned it, everybody thinks, oh, it's the free market. What they forget is we weren't competing with anyone. Other countries did plan it. They came into the market, they directly competed, they worked out how to beat us. They did it in an organised fashion. And as more and more of them beat us, we declined and declined and declined. And because of that, we're attached to a free market interpretation of our own history. But we weren't successful because of free markets. We were successful because there was no competition. As soon as the competition entered the field, and the competition wasn't using a free market, by the way, we were second best. We've declined ever since. And the confusing thing with Britain is that the sort of revival that you get in neoliberalism under Margaret Thatcher is based on a false premise. It's that everything was going fine until the socialists got in control. Well, two problems. Things weren't going fine. From 1870 onwards, Britain was declining. And secondly, the socialists didn't get control. They won elections, they seemed to get some control, but they didn't actually run stuff. So the British never planned their economy like the French. They never developed a social model like Germany. They just attempted both, and they failed with both. British industry was always a bit more short-termist. It was never kind of developed into the kind of large-scale, organised firms that you got in the Fordist era. Car industry was typical. It was really fragmented. Even when they put it together under British Leyland, under public ownership, squabbles within British Leyland led to a lack of really good kind of economies of scale. And yeah, if you've got that sort of model and the economic growth is consistently slow, then the trades unions will often want more money. And what we get in the British model from the late 60s onwards is that we get inflation, we get higher prices and costs in Britain because of the devaluation of the pound in 1967. And we get the loss of export markets, which is kind of driving this. And because of that, life in Britain becomes kind of more expensive for people. So they go on strike a lot to try and get higher wages. They try and get their living standard back. And yeah, in the 70s they sort of succeeded for a while, and you got the wages going up. But of course all that happened was the prices went up. So you get this wage price spiral. Now Britain wasn't competitive before that. You add in the wage price spiral and Britain is even less competitive. So that by the time Margaret Thatcher comes to power in 1979 and says we've got to get a hold of inflation and stop it, you can only really do that with neoliberal policies if you're prepared to allow quite a lot of industry to go to the wall. And that's what happened. And what Margaret Thatcher said was, look, if they can't compete, we're not going to bail them out. We're not going to send out the wrong incentives to people. We've got to start competing. And if you can't compete, you go out of business, you go to the wall. Now, the long-term result of that, we're living with now. It was understandable, and I really don't know how you would have dealt with the unions in the 60s and 70s. It's all, and this is an indication, it's all dysfunctional before then. It's all gone wrong before then, and perhaps there was nothing they could do. But if you take the approach Margaret Thatcher took, then you're going to get this difficulty that industry is too small. A bit like Spain, we don't have enough good quality industries and enough good quality jobs. So We've gone down the service sector route, we've gone down the low wage route, we've deregulated everything, made the labour cheaper, create lots of jobs. But our dynamic is short-termist. Britain's also associated with these liberal policies, although it's inaccurate historically, actually. Britain was reasonably protectionist, even when there was no competition. There was regulation, there was the state involvement. But we're associated with this liberal model of open trade, free trade, global trade, which puts us at odds with our European partners who like to focus on European trade at the expense of global trade. So a lot of our trade partners are outside of the EU, and we've always seen the EU as being incompatible with relationships with Australia, America, New Zealand, etc. We've always favoured a minimal state compared to the strong state in France and the generally bigger states in Europe. We've tended to be scared of this kind of large welfare and kind of socialist social protection policies that you have in some parts of Europe. We wanted to make the state a bit smaller, spend a bit less on this, make the labour market more flexible and cheaper than it is in many of our continental neighbours. So you can see some areas where the British model is a bit different to kind of all of the others. It's definitely more liberal than anybody else we've looked at. And it's also based on a false premise. It's based on the idea that this liberal stuff made us rich and was the secret to our success. Nope, the secret to our success was that there was no one else to compete with. We got there first by accident. It wasn't particularly liberal. It's a long time ago. And as soon as anybody else started to compete, like the Germans or the Americans in the late 19th century, they overtook us and went past us very quickly. So decline started earlier than a lot of people say. But in terms of our relationship with Europe, you can see that we're a bit different, and we might not like some of the trends within Europe, and we might not like some of the features of some of the other countries' models. And as a result, we may find their policies and preferences inappropriate.